I want to open up with an apology for my bad audio. I have several good microphones. The problem is my computer. It seems to gurgle and hiss and completely ruin most audio in my videos lately. I thank you all for watching and subscribing. And though my channel has grown, my personal life is still a mess. Soon the winter will arrive, and my plumbing will freeze, and I'll be using a bucket filled with cedar chips as my toilet. But my greatest poverty is time to remedy all these broken parts of my life, conflicted between my off-grid projects and a coffee shop in which I've been working on for 2 years. An uphill battle serving a product in a small Mormon town in which half the population has no interest in what I have to serve. And really all I want to do is make videos. Ultimately, I'm an artist, and thus far this is my favorite art medium. But sadly, my art is perhaps the most neglected part of my life, but perhaps the most important. Welcome. Here I'm using an experimental version, once again, of Google. I'm not sure if I could place a pin here, but here are the coordinates down here. And I was just watching a video with Philip, Andreas, and Baked and Awake, and they were talking about the New Madrid Earthquake in 1811, something I've touched on in past videos. But while I was listening to their conversation, I noticed Philip say that we don't see ruins along the New Madrid fault line. And there's one in particular that I want to show today, again that I've shown in the past. And where am I right now? Perhaps the site of another ruin. So here we are on the Mississippi. In 1811, the Mississippi was said to flow backwards because it was rocked so hard by this series of earthquakes. And I think any of us doing this kind of research may realize that this probably was not a natural earthquake, but rather a reset, the reset of this time period. And getting back to my point, do we see ruins in the Americas? Well, I think we do. All the Civil War brick ruins buried under mud, clearly not built by the people of this time period, and all along the Mississippi. The Mississippi may not even be natural, perhaps these being the waterways of the past civilization. And that is exactly what I think. And that's what I was just doing down here, just imagining a prior civilization that moved by waterway as one of their means. And if that were the case, then this would be some sort of grand avenue or boulevard. And do we see signs of ruins under here? I think so. All of this seeming to have ruins underneath it. Now just out in the swamps, but none of this looking natural. This clearly not being natural. And just a complete wipeout. But yet everything is still out here, waiting to be explored. Here, for example, again. And more impressive than any of this are these Windsor ruins found here. Some of my favorite ruins. And if we take a little zoom here, we see these absolutely impressive columns. And again, I made a full video on these ruins. I'll leave the link below. And here's what they look like. No less glorious than any ruins found anywhere in the world, but here, just hanging out in Mississippi, out in the middle of nowhere. And the most ridiculous story on a young man that acquired a small fortune, built this glory, and died 1 year later. And I was very excited when I discovered these ruins. For me, this was a smoking gun that I needed. It's one thing to see the glorious buildings that we examine in every state in our nation, along with every country in our realm. But if we had these glorious buildings, I would also expect that we would have these types of ruins as well. And here they are. I have an amazing picture in my other video of a girl standing next to these ruins, and she's tiny. Brick with a cement facade. Absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm absolutely sure that there's more of these to be found. And I just wanted to share that real quick, just in case you've never seen these. In Mississippi, and most likely the remains of this massive cataclysm that swept over this land. And here's another one, the Parthenon in Nashville. So here, just to get an idea, we're on the Mississippi. We can see all the different directions in which the water used to flow. Remains all over of a seafaring and canal building people. And now we'll have a little look at this Parthenon in Nashville. Here we can see the people next to the columns, just to give you an idea of how massive this is. And here I've just parked this in the parking lot, just to get a feel of what you would experience. Really a wonder, just out here in a park, and here not far from the river, and perhaps many of these roads were once canals leading right to the water. And similar to when I'm out exploring in my neck of the woods, it's the same thing out here. So much to be discovered, most of our past being buried. If I've never mentioned it, I hate technology. And right now I want to look at Mexico City. A lot of anomalies in Mexico. And here someone told me in a comment to check out this Palace de Bellas Artes in Mexico City. Translated as the Palace of Fine Arts, very similar to our World's Fairs. The building is located on the western side of the historic center of Mexico City. Architectural style is Art Nouveau or Neoclassical. And as I've mentioned before, this is just ridiculous. Not impressed with these fancy names. Always the same style, and clearly the same people. Construction started in 1904, and it was inaugurated in 1934. Inaugurated, founded, dedicated, all being names that seem to indicate the inheritance of a building. And finally the redesignation. And the seating capacity is almost 2,000. The first theater in Mexico was built in the 19th century, the National Theater of Mexico. But it was soon decided to tear this down for a more opulent building in time for centennial of the Mexican War of Independence in 1910. How can anybody believe this stupid narrative? It was built in the late 19th century, but it was soon decided to tear down, like some sort of history of spoiled children. Now they decide to build a new building. They hire Italian architect Adamo Bori in 1904, but complications arising from the soft subsoil and the political problems, both before and during the Mexican Revolution, hindered and finally stopped construction in 1913. Construction began again in 1932 under architect Federico Mariscal and was completed in 1934. So first of all, we had 5, 6, or 7 architects at the beginning, and they stopped building in 1913, and again they need to hire an architect in 1932. Architects don't build anything. Architects design buildings. They don't build them. And here you had almost a dozen architects initially design this building. Construction began, and it was halted because of poor soil and political turmoil. And now we're told they hire this architect 30 years later, and in 2 years he finishes the building. And here a little look. Someone recently told me I say that too much, but we're just not going to have time for a big look. That would require a vacation. But for me, this is almost just as good. Sitting by the fire in the comfort of my home, somehow able to teleport, at least partially, to Mexico. And for this reason, I love technology. A true love and hate relationship. Seems to be the case with everything in life. Everything eventually becomes a pain in the ass. And no skimping on this baby. No mention of the soil problem 30 years later. This beauty really going up without a hiccup. And of course I don't believe this story, but somebody built it. And thank God they built it well. All these buildings, if they were not built so well, they may not have endured the test of time, allowing us to pop out of our amnesia and begin to see this realm as it really is. Here I was just recommended a tomb. Would you like to eat? Okay, we can do that. This was a share by C.Vassilis. Do check out his channel. Grant's Tomb, officially the General Grant's National Memorial, is the final resting place of Ulysses S. Grant, 18th President of the United States. It's a classical domed mausoleum located in Upper Manhattan, New York City. Upon Grant's death in 1885, his widow declared that he had wished to be buried in New York. They formed the Grant Monument Association. They appealed for funds. Progress was slow at first, so he only requested to be buried in New York. These were Grant's wishes in 1885. No mention that he wanted a massive mausoleum tomb. And there's more building materials in this tomb than on the very streets in 1885. One could have paved several blocks with all this material. And look at this beauty. Unbelievable. Just a perfect building. And I usually avoid talking about the reset in recent times. It's no shock by now, and really the clues have been around our entire lives. But of course, the news is everywhere, coming from all different angles, regardless of what you think is going on politically, or the shape of our realm, or what is actually in the heavens above. We all see signs, a quickening. And this channel is really interesting. A channel rooted in God. And here explaining it from a biblical perspective. And also tying it into a Planet X. And everybody will have a different way of describing and explaining the same events. And here they're talking about how the Earth is heating up underneath the crust. We've seen such ideas in science in which the heating can be so great that the land above is allowed to slide around like hot mud. And in this channel's opinion, this heat must dissipate, ultimately moving up into the ionosphere, or whatever your constitution calls it, the dome, the heavens above, and comes raining back down in trillions of volts of plasma lightning. And this man, seeming pretty honest, claims he has many sources in high places with good intentions, leaking information. And these people in high places confirm all of these theories, that a great plasma storm is coming. And this man consulted other experts, thinking for his safety, even though ultimately he's a man of God, seems to be rooted in higher things. He asked his friend, what could we expect of such a plasma storm of trillions of volts? And he said, in short, what would happen under a plasma strike, for example, is that if one strike were to hit half a mile down the road from my house, there would be nothing left but glass. Everything would melt instantly from that type of lightning strike. And ultimately, such a force would rip the surface right open, and uncertain what the results of such an event would be. And I think we know, when we look at all these pictures all throughout our realm, even in old times, walls and brick and entire cities on mountains melting. And what I found interesting was how this was all caused by heating from beneath, and uncertain what we could do to weather such a storm. And I think that's exactly the questions that this man is posing. I do remember watching a video on YouTube by Brian Austin Lamb, and his solution seemed to be that we would need to strap ourselves to stone to avoid being sucked off into the air. And I just remember thinking, if I have to chain myself to some rock to survive, I would much rather go quickly than endure this realm after an event of such a magnitude. And still seeming like a game of roulette, perhaps the best place to be is in some of these tunnels. We all have them. But again, I decided long ago I would live my life in a prepared fashion, but not worry about the end. The end is an absolute certainty in all of our lives, and why should we allow the quality of our lives, even if long, still short, to be affected by someone's version of how the end will be? Even the good book telling us nobody shall know the end, or the time of it. So very fascinating. I don't think I'll watch the rest. I think I've heard enough, and I've said it before, we should live our lives however we would live them in the moment, regardless of what's going on, but especially in the light of such ideas. If anything, this is not a reason to fear, but to let go of fears, and especially ones that are unwarranted. Fears based on the artificial constructs of man, fears based in the failure to perform in the way desired by this artificial construct. And prepare your life in the best way you can, and not driven by fear, but driven by correctness, the same way the ant prepares for winter, and the bird and the squirrel. And here someone has just made a little video on me. I feel pretty honored. I did see this on Martin's channel, Flat Earth British, and Martin got a look at this guy and pointed out that it looked like me. And perhaps, but I think there is a photo from the past, in fact one of the oldest photographs ever, that really resembles me. And I found the photo on accident long ago and felt like I was looking at myself. I felt like I knew what the photograph was thinking. And let's have a look at that. Here, if you punch in the words "world's first selfie," you'll come up with this photo. And this, I think, really looks like me. Especially the expression and the thought being had, which is shaping the eyes and the face. And this guy is really excited, but trying not to act excited, because he's not sure if there is cause for celebration yet. And why is that? Because he is said to have taken the world's first selfie. The world's first selfie, taken in 1839 by Robert Cornelius. It was also the first ever photographic portrait of a human being. 1839. So that's it. I thank you for joining me, and do have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Now out there is the famous Skinwalker Ranch. Much money and research goes into this ranch, and while they spend millions of dollars trying to figure out what's going on, I think from our research, what is clear is that this is an old melted castle, and really a melted city. And if there is activity here, it's probably because there's still a civilization existing within.